Welcome to today's CrossPoint devotion. I hope this devotion is going to encourage you as you walk with Jesus. Do you remember when you were a child and there were a lot of rules? It seemed like at my house we had a lot of rules. Like when you get up in the morning before you go to school, you must make up your bed. Then when you finish your meal, you must take your dishes to the sink. We had rules after school because when I came home from school, my mother said the first thing you're going to do before you do your homework is you must sweep the carport. And so there were rules everywhere. There were rules at school, there were rules at home. There seemed to be rules when I went to visit my friends, and I thought that I was going to get away from them when I went to visit them. There were rules everywhere. I think sometimes that's why when we read the Old Testament in particular, we kind of get turned off. There are a lot of rules, especially when you read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It just seems like that whole section is about rules, and that's what we call it, the law. Have you ever wondered why all those rules were there? Well, all of those rules were there for a purpose. They were pointing us toward the need for Jesus because all of those rules reminded us we could never live up to God's standards. But here's something that I think we often miss when it comes to the rules that God has given us. Those rules were a tutor to prepare us to get ready for Jesus, to help us know we needed a Savior because we couldn't keep the rules. But all of those rules really were preceded by a relationship. And that's what we miss. When we go back to Exodus chapter 20, what we often focus on are the 10 commandments, the 10 rules. And we start reading through those, and there are some of those rules that are focused on our relationship with God, like we shall not make graven images, and we shall not take the Lord's name in vain, and things of that nature. We shall honor the Sabbath. But then there are some other rules that are about our relationships with each other. But the whole point is there are 10 rules, and we're back to that same problem. We hate rules. And yet God's given us 10 that we have to follow. But there's one verse that I think we often miss before we start reading the 10 commandments. I want to read it for you. It comes from Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, and we're thinking to ourselves, okay, here they come, the 10 rules. But don't miss what God says next. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Before he talks about the rules, the 10 rules, the 10 commandments, he talks about the relationship that he has already established with Israel. That is a very significant fact because up until that time, what they've been watching is God do his work. God sent Moses down to Pharaoh to say to Pharaoh, let my people go. And when Pharaoh did not cooperate, what did God do? He began to act on behalf of his people. Why? He had a relationship with them. He had chosen them in Abraham to be his people, to make his name known in the world. And so from the time of Abraham all the way through the time while they were slaves in Egypt, God had always wanted a relationship. And then when he came to Egypt and he sent forth those plagues, and he got a hold of Pharaoh's heart to the point that Pharaoh finally said, get these people out of here. All of that was about God continuing his relationship with Israel. God always wants the relationship before he wants the rules. And sometimes we get so hung up on the rules, we forget how much he wants the relationship. Even the rules themselves, if we go back and talk about it in terms of what we said at the beginning of this devotion, those rules were to drive us to a relationship that we can now have with God through Jesus Christ. You see, God's really not about the rules. He's really about the relationship. He loves us. He loves you. He loves me. Now, our sin has broken that relationship, and that's why he sent Jesus. But those rules were just put in place to drive us to the relationship that was going to come in Jesus Christ. So if you've been reading the Old Testament, just scratching your head and thinking, my goodness, this is just rules, don't miss. He really wants a relationship. And those rules are just driving you to Jesus so he can have the relationship he's always wanted with you and with me. I hope that'll encourage you as you read the Old Testament going forward, and I hope you have a great day.